When a world-famous pianist invited a quiet cleaner to the piano as a joke, no one expected the first note she played would silence the room and change their lives forever. The grand concert hall in Vienna was glowing that evening. Its crystal chandeliers sparkled from the high ceiling, and soft classical music played in the background. The place was filled with the sound of laughter, conversations, and glasses clinking. Together, it was the night of a big charity gala, and the event was all about elegance, music, celebration. People in beautiful clothes walked around holding champagne, talking about art, politics, and, most importantly, the famous pianist, Eric Lang, who was going to perform that night. Eric was a star. He had played in the greatest halls of Europe, from Berlin to Paris, and now he was here in Vienna. Tall, with sharp cheekbones and slicked-back silver hair, he was known not only for his brilliant piano skills, but also for his arrogance and sarcastic sense of humor. In the middle of this glamorous scene, there was one person who didn't quite fit in, Maria Keller. Maria was a quiet woman in her 50s. Her short brown hair had streaks of gray, her hands were calloused, and her clothes were plain and simple. She worked as a cleaner at the concert hall and had been working there for the past 15 years. That day her shift ended just before the gala began. Tired, she had finished wiping down the backstage area and cleaning the dressing rooms. She was about to leave through the back door when something made her stop. She heard the sound of the piano. Someone was rehearsing on the stage. Maria knew that sound too well. It was Eric Lang's music. She had heard his recordings many times when she worked late at night and played the radio softly in the empty hall. But now, hearing him live so close, she couldn't help but be drawn to the music. Quietly, she walked into the main hall and sat down on one of the empty seats in the back row. The hall wasn't full yet. Some staff were arranging flowers, checking lights, and testing microphones. A few guests had arrived early and were wandering about. Eric was at the piano, warming up his fingers, not paying attention to anyone. Maria sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, and listened. The sound of the piano touched something deep inside her, a part of her that had been asleep for years. Her eyes filled with tears as Eric's fingers moved across the keys. The music was perfect, cold, and exact. But to Maria something felt missing, some emotion, some soul. As the rehearsal ended, Eric stood up and bowed playfully to the few guests watching. He was in a good mood and liked to make jokes. He walked around the hall, pretending to be humble, shaking hands with people, and making sarcastic comments that made them laugh politely. Then his eyes fell on Maria. Sitting alone in the back, he walked toward her with a smirk. She stood up quickly, unsure if she was even allowed to be there. She looked down, embarrassed, ready to leave. But Eric, always looking for entertainment, stopped her. Well, what do we have here?" he said, loud enough for others too. "Here, a guest I don't recognize. Or are you part of the secret jury?" A few people laughed. Maria looked nervous and tried to speak, but Eric wasn't done. "You were watching very seriously. Do you play?" he asked, joking. Maria shook her head slowly, unsure how to respond. Eric turned to the others and said loudly, "Shall we let her try the piano? Come on, why not? Let's have some fun." People clapped and laughed. Maria's face turned red. She shook her head again and said softly, No, thank you." But Eric was already leading her toward the stage. "Just one note, or maybe two. Let's see what magic you have." Everyone watched, smiling and curious. It was all just a joke to them, a rich man's entertainment. No one expected anything special. They even thought it would be funny if she sat there and didn't know how to play. Maria reached the stage slowly. Her legs felt heavy, and her heart was pounding. She hadn't touched a grand piano in decades. Memories rushed back of a small girl in a village, practicing for hours, dreaming of playing in halls like this. But life had pushed that dream far away. She stood by the piano for a moment, then looked at Eric. He raised his eyebrows playfully and stepped aside, giving her the seat. With trembling hands, Maria sat down. She touched the keys gently, almost as if afraid they would break. The hall had fallen silent. Everyone was watching. No one was laughing anymore. She closed her eyes. Then she began to play. It started softly, a gentle melody. one that floated in the air, like a whisper. Her fingers moved slowly at first, then with more confidence. The piece she played was Chopin, a difficult one, but it flowed from her hands as if the music had lived inside her all along. Waiting for this moment to return, the notes filled the hall, echoing through the marble walls and high ceiling. The guests stopped moving. Waiters froze mid-step. Even Eric stood motionless. The music was not loud or showy. It was full of emotion, sadness, love, loss, beauty, everything that could not be said with words. Maria didn't look at anyone. Her eyes were closed, and her face was calm. She was lost in the music. And for a few minutes, so was everyone else. When the piece ended, there was no immediate applause. Just silence deep and thick, like the whole room was holding its breath. Then, suddenly, the audience burst into claps and cheers. People stood up. Some were wiping their eyes. A few guests looked around in disbelief, asking each other, "Who is she?" Maria stood up slowly. Her hands were still shaking. She looked around at the people clapping and didn't know what to do. She gave a small bow and began to walk off the stage. Eric stepped in front of her, his face unreadable. He wasn't smiling. His usual arrogant charm was gone. He looked at her seriously, and for the first time he didn't have a clever sense. Line ready. "Where did you learn that?" he finally asked, his voice quiet. Maria looked at him and replied softly, "A long time ago. In another life." He stared at her for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "That," he said, "was real music." The crowd continued to cheer. Someone shouted, "Encore!" Others asked for her name. But Maria kept walking, politely nodding and trying to find the exit. Backstage, staff members came running to her, asking who she was, how she knew the piece, and if she would perform again. But she only smiled gently and said, "I'm just a cleaner." And with that, she walked out of the spotlight and disappeared into the quiet streets of Vienna, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces and one famous pianist who suddenly felt like a student again. What began as a simple joke, a moment meant for laughter, turned into something unforgettable. Nobody there that night would ever forget the sound of that music or the look on Eric Lang's face when he realized he had just witnessed something far greater than skill or fame. He had seen true talent humble, hidden, and beautiful, and the story was just beginning. The moment Maria finished playing the last note on the piano, there was a strange silence in the grand concert hall. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it felt full. It's full of emotion, full of surprise. It's full of something people couldn't explain. And then slowly, the sound of clapping started. First from one corner of the room, then more hands joined in. And before long, the entire hall was echoing with loud applause. People stood up. Some clapped, some cheered, and others just stood, still, stunned by what they had witnessed. A few guests even had tears in their eyes. Not because the music was sad, but because it was real. It had touched something inside them. It reminded them of something they didn't even know they had forgotten: emotion, depth, beauty. Something so rare that when it appeared suddenly, it took their breath away. Maria, on the other hand, looked lost. She had come to clean the building, not to be the center of attention. The bright lights on, her face, the crowd standing and clapping, the eyes staring at her, it was all too much. Her hands were still shaking slightly. Her heart was racing. She looked around nervously, not knowing what to do. Eric Lang was still standing where he had been when she began playing. His usual playful expression was gone. His smile, which never seemed to leave his face, had faded. He didn't clap. He didn't speak. He simply stared at Maria like a man who had just seen something he couldn't explain. The stage manager came running from backstage and whispered something to one of the event organizers. People started asking questions. Who is she? Where? Did she come from? Was this planned? Is she a hidden talent? But nobody had answers. Maria wasn't on the program. Her name wasn't on any list. She was a mystery, and people love mysteries. Someone tried to bring a microphone to her, asking her to say a few words. But Maria simply shook her head and whispered, "Please no." She stepped down from the stage quickly and began walking toward the back of the hall. Eric suddenly woke up from his frozen state and followed her. He caught up with her just near the side curtain. "Wait," he said. Maria turned to him, unsure what to expect. Was he angry? Was he going to make another joke? But Eric looked different now, humbled, human. "Where did you learn that?" He asked again, his voice softer than before. Maria didn't answer right away. She looked past him, toward the piano. Her eyes had a faraway look, as if she were seeing something from the past. "I used to play a long time ago," she said simply. The event organizers were now nearby, trying to get information from her. "What's your name? Were you trained? Do you want to perform again?" But Maria gently smiled and said nothing more. She slowly moved toward the exit, leaving Eric and the crowd behind. Outside, the night was cool. The wind brushed against her face. She pulled her coat tight and walked toward the small flat she lived in. Her steps were slow, but her mind was running fast. Memories came flooding in of her childhood, her first piano, the music school, her dreams, her family, and the long silence that followed when her life changed. Back inside the concert hall, the event continued, but something had shifted. People were no longer only talking about Eric Lang. The night belonged to someone else now, a simple woman who played like the music was a part of her soul. The next day, the story spread like fire. A few guests at the gala had taken short videos of her performance. Those videos quickly went viral. "Unknown woman shocks famous pianist with perfect performance," the headlines read. Social media was flooded with clips of Maria playing, and everyone wanted to know who she was. Journalists came to the concert hall asking questions. Reporters tried to track her down. Eric was also affected. Couldn't get her performance out of his head. He kept playing the same Chopin piece again and again in his hotel room, but it didn't sound like hers. His version had skill, speed, technique, but hers had something more, something he couldn't recreate. That afternoon, Eric asked the staff about her. A few backstage workers told him her name was Maria Keller. She worked as a cleaner at the concert hall for many years. She never spoke much and always left quietly. No one knew she could play. No one had seen her near the piano. Eric felt a strange mix of emotions. Surprise, admiration, confusion, and something else he couldn't name. He decided he needed to talk to her again. Not as a joke, not as a show, but because he felt that her music had awakened something in him. He asked for her address and went to visit her that evening. Maria lived in a small apartment in a quiet corner of the city. Her building was old, with creaky stairs and peeling paint. Eric knocked on the door. There was a pause. Then the door opened slightly, and Maria looked out. When she saw Eric, she looked surprised. But she didn't close the door. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," Eric said. Maria stepped aside and let him in. Her apartment was simple. A small sofa, a wooden table, some books on a shelf. In one corner, there was an old keyboard. Not a real piano, but one she clearly used to practice. A few photos were pinned to the wall. Most of them were of children, probably her family or students. "I didn't expect you to come," Maria said softly. "I didn't expect you to play like that," Eric replied, his voice honest. They sat down. Eric looked around the room. It was nothing like his world of fancy hotels and champagne concerts. "Why don't you perform?" asked. "Why are you hiding?" Maria sighed. It was a deep, tired sigh, one that carried many years of stories. "I used to play," she said. "When I was young, I trained at a music school. I dreamed of playing in concert halls, just like you." "What happened?" he asked. Maria looked down at her hands. She rubbed them slowly. "There was war. My village was destroyed. My father died. We had to move. My mother was sick. I had younger siblings to take care of. I had to work. Music became a luxury I couldn't afford." Eric didn't speak. He listened. "I played when I could," she continued. "Late at night, in empty churches, in basements, sometimes just in my head. But I never stopped loving it." She paused for a moment. "When I started working at the concert hall, I felt closer to music again. I would stay after my shift and just touch the piano sometimes. I never thought I would play in front of anyone again. Eric leaned back, felt a strange heaviness in his chest. You were better than me, he said. Honestly, not technically, but emotionally. Your music had truth. Maria gave a small smile. That's because it's the only thing I never lost. There was a long silence between them, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Eric stood up. I want the world to hear you, he said. Should perform again. For real. Maria shook, her head gently. I'm not a performer anymore. I've made peace with that. But you could inspire so many people, he insisted. People need to hear you. I'm just a cleaner, she said softly. No, Eric replied. You are a musician? It's one of the best I've ever met. He left shortly after, promising to come again. The next few days, the story continued to grow. Newspapers published articles about the mystery pianist. Journalists tried to find her. But Maria kept herself hidden. She didn't want attention. She didn't want fame. She had lived a quiet life for too long. She was afraid of what change might bring. But Eric couldn't let go. He returned to the concert hall and played her piece again. This time, he played it differently. Slower, with feeling. He closed his eyes and thought of her life, her struggle, her strength. And for the first time in years, he felt something real in his music. The staff at the hall began to look at Maria differently. Some apologized for ignoring her before. Others asked her to teach their children music. A few younger staff members even asked her to show them how to play. Maria smiled politely, but kept to herself. Still, inside her heart, something had changed. The music inside her was alive again. It's not just in secret, not just for herself, but for others too. And even though she didn't know it yet, the world was not done listening to her. After that unforgettable night in the concert hall, everything around Maria Keller began to change. Her performance had touched so many hearts, but now the world wanted to know who she really was. Videos of her playing were shared by millions, but she continued to stay quiet. She didn't try to be famous. She didn't chase attention. She just went back to her regular life, mopping floors, cleaning mirrors, and emptying trash bins. But deep inside her, something had awakened Maria. Had hidden her gift for decades? She had kept her memories locked away like old books in a forgotten shelf. Out. But now, after years of silence, the music was alive again. And with it came the past, the story of how everything began and how everything was lost. When Maria was just a little girl, she lived in a small village in Eastern Europe. Her house was simple, made of wood and stone, but filled with warmth and love. Her father was a schoolteacher, and her mother stayed home to care for Maria and her younger brother. They didn't have much money, but they had books, stories, laughter, and music. In the corner of their living room stood an old upright piano. It had yellow keys and a few broken strings, but to Maria, it was the most magical thing in the world. She discovered it when she was 5 years old. One day, she touched a key and heard a sound that made her eyes light up. After that, she was always drawn to it. She would play simple tunes, copying melodies she heard in the village or making up her own. Her father noticed her talent and began teaching her the basics. Later, a local music teacher offered to give her lessons for free because he saw how quickly she learned. By the time she was 8, she was playing pieces that older students couldn't manage. Her fingers danced across the keys. She played with a natural grace and deep emotion, even as a child. When Maria was 12, she was accepted into a prestigious music conservatory in the city. Her parents were so proud. Her father sold his favorite books to buy her a proper pair of shoes. Her mother wept the day she left, placing a tiny cross in Maria's hand and whispering, "Never forget who you are." At the conservatory, Maria lived among other young musicians. Some came from wealthy families, others from far places. It was a different world, but Maria stood out. Her teachers praised her talent. Audiences clapped wildly after her performances. She started winning small competitions and was seen as a rising star. But then, everything changed. One winter night, a group of soldiers arrived in the city. War had reached their doorstep. Conservatory was shut down. Students were sent home. But home, for Maria, no longer existed. Her village had been bombed. Her house was gone. Her father had been killed. And her mother and brother were missing. She searched for them desperately, walking from town to town, asking strangers for news. Finally, she found her mother in a shelter, sick and weak, with her little brother by her side. From that moment on, Maria's dreams of becoming a pianist ended. Her life became about survival. She worked in factories, farms, and even as a maid. Anything to earn money. Music became a memory, something too painful to think about. She had no piano, no time, and no strength left for art. But in the quiet moments, and late at night, she would remember the feel of the keys under her fingers. And sometimes, she would play invisible melodies on the table or hum softly to herself as she worked. Years passed. She moved to Vienna, hoping for better work. She found a job as a cleaner at the concert hall. It paid little, but it gave her comfort. Being close to music again, even just hearing rehearsals from the hallways, made her feel less alone. At night, when everyone had gone home, she would quietly walk to the grand piano and sit for a few minutes. She never played loudly, just soft notes, gentle melodies, her way of speaking to the past. And then came the night when Eric Lang had joked with her. That silly moment when he offered the piano as a joke had become the key that unlocked her story. Now, as people tried to find out more about her, Maria stayed quiet, but she couldn't stop the memories. They came back stronger than ever. The notes of Chopin, the smell of her childhood home, her father's laughter, her mother's cooking, her brother's small hands tugging at her coat, all of it returned, like music hidden in the wind. One afternoon, she sat in her small kitchen with Eric. He had come again, holding 2 cups of hot coffee and wearing a look that was no longer proud but kind. "Maria," he said, "I know what you've been through. Some of it. I read some old news articles. Your village. The war." She didn't answer right away, and she simply said, "I used to think my story was over." "It's not," Eric said. "It's just beginning." He leaned forward. "I want people to hear you. Not because it's good for them, though it is, but because it's good for you. Music is who you are." Maria looked at him, her eyes tired but warm. "I don't need applause," she said. "I don't need lights. I just want peace." "You can have both," Eric said. "You can teach. You can perform when you want. Let the world know that beauty still exists, even in people they don't notice." She smiled at that. It was true. She had spent so long in the background, invisible. But that night on stage, she had felt seen again. Not because of fame, but because her music had finally spoken. Eric left her apartment and walked back into the busy Vienna streets. But he felt lighter, inspired, changed in the days that followed. Maria was invited to appear on television to give interviews, to sign with recording companies, but she refused. Instead, she agreed to meet with a small group of children. From a shelter, her parents had seen the video and asked if Maria would come to teach them music. She agreed. That Sunday, she walked into a small room filled with secondhand instruments and shy faces. She sat at a worn-down piano and told the children her story, not the sad parts, but the beautiful parts. She told them about the joy of sound, the colors of melody, the happiness of sharing music. Then she played, and they listened. Not one of them moved. They were young, with no training, no big words to describe what they felt, but they knew something special was happening, felt it in their hearts. After the lesson, a small girl with tangled hair came up and asked Ken, "I play like you one day." Maria smiled, bent down, and said, "You already have the music in you. Now we just have to find it." That night, Maria sat alone in her apartment. She didn't feel like a cleaner anymore. She didn't feel like a forgotten woman. She felt like herself, the girl from the village, the student from the conservatory, the sister, the daughter, the musician. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew that her music would know. As longer stay silent, it would live again in her fingers, in the children she taught, in the hearts of those who listened in a world that had once forgotten her, and in a world that now couldn't forget her. Eric Lang was a man who had always been in control. On the stage, behind the piano, or even during interviews, he spoke with confidence, moved with pride, performed with perfection. He was a man who believed he had seen everything music had to offer. But after Maria's unexpected performance, something inside him had changed. He began to question things he never thought he would. For many years, Eric had followed a strict routine. Practice, travel, perform, repeat. His fingers moved fast, and his concerts were always full. He was called a genius by critics, a master by fans. But now, after hearing Maria's simple, emotional playing, Eric started to feel like something was missing in his music. It wasn't about talent. He had that. It wasn't about skill. He had trained his whole life. But Maria had something. More truth. He found himself playing differently. Slower, softer, with feeling. He remembered her every time he touched the piano. And the more he thought about her, the more he realized how much she had given up and how much she still had to offer. She was not only a pianist, she was a survivor, a hidden artist, a soul that had been quiet for too long. One morning, Eric walked into the director's office at the Vienna Concert Hall and placed a folder on the desk. "I want her to perform," he said. The director looked confused. "Who?" "Maria Keller." "The cleaner." "No, the pianist," Eric said firmly. "But Eric," the director began, "she's not trained for concerts. She has no name. We've never even heard of her before last week." "That's your mistake," Eric replied. "You didn't see her. You didn't hear her." The director paused. Eric was not the kind of man who begged for anything. But now he looked serious, almost desperate. "All right," the director finally said. "We'll arrange a private audition, if she agrees." But that was the hardest part. Maria had already turned down many offers. She didn't want the spotlight. She didn't believe she belonged on the stage. Her life had been far too simple, too broken, too quiet for anything so grand. When Eric visited her again, she was cooking soup in her tiny kitchen. He stood at the door, watching her quietly. She looked peaceful. "At home, I spoke to the concert hall," he said. She turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "I don't want to perform." "Eric," she said, even before he finished. "Why not?" He asked. "I'm not ready." "You were more ready than anyone else that night. That night was an accident." "No," he said. "It was a moment of truth, and people need more of that." Maria sighed and sat down. She poured soup into 2 bowls and placed one in front of him. They ate in silence for a while. Then she said, "What if I fail? What if people laugh? They already love you," Eric said gently. "And if you fail, you'll still have done something most people never even dare to try." She looked at him, her eyes unsure. He reached into his bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "A tour," he said. 3 cities. You and me. Together." Maria laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt so impossible. "You're asking a cleaner to go on tour with Europe's most famous pianist?" "I'm asking a pianist to come back to the world," he replied. She looked at the paper, then at him. Part of her wanted to say no, to hide, to stay in her small world. But another part, the one that remembered the conservatory, the dreams, the applause, wanted to say yes. After a long pause, she nodded. "I'll try." She whispered, and just like that, something began. They started practicing in secret. Eric would come late at night to the hall. Maria would arrive quietly, wearing her simple coat and soft shoes.
Ow.
She didn't bring anything fancy, no special books, no expensive clothes, just her hands and her heart. They played together. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes they laughed. Eric pushed her to believe in herself. Maria taught him how to feel the music again. Slowly, they became partners, not just at the piano, but in spirit. Eric, who had always been proud and distant, became softer. Maria, who had always been quiet and hidden, began to shine. One evening, while they were practicing a duet, Maria stopped suddenly. "What if I can't do this?" she asked. "You can," Eric said. "I'm not like you. That's the point. You're better. You play with life in your fingers." Tears filled her eyes. Not because she was sad, but because someone believed in her again. Truly believed. News began to spread. People whispered about the mystery woman performing with Eric Lang. Tickets for the concerts sold out quickly. Journalists wanted interviews. But Maria said no. She didn't want fame. She just wanted to play. Their first concert was in Prague. The hall was full. Lights, cameras, microphones. It was everything Maria had stayed away from for so long. She stood backstage. She felt dizzy. Her legs felt weak. Her heart was pounding. Eric stood beside her. "Close your eyes," he said. "Remember the piano in your village? Remember your father watching? Remember why you started?" She closed her eyes. Then she walked onto the stage. The crowd was quiet, curious, waiting. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. Then she began to play. And once again, silence turned to magic. The music flowed from her like a river. Smooth, steady, full of emotion. Every note told a story. People listened with open mouths and wide eyes. Eric joined in, and together, their duet became something beautiful. Not just music, a connection, trust, truth. When they finished, the room exploded with applause. People stood up. Some shouted, others cried. Maria looked out at them, blinking. In disbelief, she hadn't imagined this moment in years. And now it was real. After the concert, reporters waited backstage, but Maria quietly left through the back door, just like she always had. Fame didn't interest her. She only cared about one thing, the music. In the days that followed, Eric and Maria performed in 2 more cities, Munich and Budapest. Each time the response was stronger. People came not just to hear Eric, but to see the woman who had been a cleaner, who had survived war, who had disappeared, and who had returned through music. But through it all, Maria stayed humble. She didn't wear expensive gowns or makeup. She didn't give speeches or sign autographs. She just played with feeling, with truth, with love. One night, after their final concert, Eric found her sitting on the edge of the stage, looking out at the empty chairs. "You were incredible," he said. She nodded quietly. "I'm proud of you," he added. She turned to him, her voice soft. "Thank you for believing in me." "I should be thanking you," he said. "You gave me my heart back." They sat in silence, both of them understanding what had happened. This wasn't just a tour. It was a journey, a return, a rebirth, for both of them. Later that week, Maria told Eric she didn't want to perform anymore, at least not in big halls. "I want to teach," she said. "There are so many children like I was, poor, scared, full of music with nowhere to go. I want to help them." Eric smiled. "That's the most beautiful performance of all." She went back to Vienna and started a small school in a quiet neighborhood. She didn't charge money. She didn't look for headlines. She just taught, with love, with patience, with the same gentle touch she had when she played the piano. And in every lesson, she told her students, "You don't need to be famous. You just need to be honest. If your music is true, people will feel it." And they did, because music, like truth, cannot be hidden forever. The sky over Vienna was painted with soft colors that evening, gentle pinks, golds, and shades of purple. It felt like the whole city was quietly preparing for something special. Inside the Grand Vienna Opera House, people were arriving one by one, their footsteps echoing across the marble floors. Everyone was dressed in their finest. Elegant gowns, polished shoes, dark suits, and sparkling jewelry were everywhere. But the excitement in the air wasn't just about another concert. It was about something rare, something people could feel, but not quite explain. That night, stage would be shared by 2 people. One was Eric Lang, a world-famous pianist known in every country where music lived. The other was Maria Keller, once unknown, once a cleaner, now someone whose story had touched thousands. This would be the first time she would perform on such a big stage since her surprise debut. And everyone, musicians, reporters, students, lovers of music, wanted to witness it. Backstage, Maria stood quietly near the curtain. Her hands were warm from practice, but her heart was beating fast. She wore a simple black dress, not made by a famous designer, but one she had chosen herself. No diamonds, no lipstick, just herself. And that was enough. She looked out at the audience through a small gap in the curtain. Every seat was full. People were whispering to each other, flipping through programs, waiting. A few held printed photos of her from news articles. Some carried flowers, but Maria tried not to think about all that. She had only one thought in her heart: to play the piano honestly. Eric came beside her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" he asked. She looked at him and smiled. "As ready as I'll ever be." "You've already won." "Their hearts," he said. "Now just play for yours." A few moments later, the announcer walked onto the stage. The room grew quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice said, "tonight we welcome not just music, but a story. A story of silence and sound. A story of loss, strength, and rediscovery. Please welcome Mr. Eric Lang and Ms. Maria Keller." The lights dimmed. A soft spotlight shone on the stage. Maria walked out slowly beside Eric. The applause started like a wave, soft at first, then stronger, louder. People stood as she walked toward the piano. Some clapped politely, others with emotion in their eyes. But everyone clapped with respect. She wasn't just a surprise anymore. She was an artist. Maria sat at the piano. Eric sat at the second one beside her. For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that holds every breath, every heartbeat. Then, Maria placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. It was a new piece, not Chopin, not Beethoven, but something she had written herself. A soft melody that rose like morning light. The notes told a story not in words, but in emotion. There were parts that felt like childhood, parts that sounded like grief, then joy, then peace. The music moved gently, never trying to impress, only to touch. As she played, the audience listened, as if they were hearing their own memories. Eric joined in, his notes weaving through hers. They didn't fight for attention. They danced together, in harmony. Their music was a conversation between two people who had lived very different lives, but had found something deep and common inside the same art. When the final note faded, there was another pause. Not because people didn't like it, but because they didn't want it to end. Then, once again, the opera house exploded with applause. But this time, it was more than applause. People cheered, whistled, even cried. Maria stood slowly. She bowed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The music had said everything after the concert. People waited outside the opera house, hoping to see her. Some held flowers, others held their hands to their hearts. A little girl stood on the steps with a notebook and a pen, hoping for an autograph. Maria came out quietly through the side door. She didn't expect a crowd, but they were there. When she stepped outside, they noticed her, and a hush fell over them. Then a small voice called out, "Thank you." Maria turned. What? It was the little girl. "For what?" Maria asked kindly. "For giving me hope." Maria walked to her, signed the notebook with a soft smile, and whispered, "Always believe in your heart." In the days that followed, reviews of the concert filled newspapers and websites. Critics called it the most moving concert of the decade. Some said Maria brought back emotion to classical music. Others said she had reminded them why music matters in the first place. But none of the praise changed Maria. She still took the tram to her music school every morning. She still wore simple clothes and drank tea by her window. She still taught children who had no money and no piano at home. She found joy in helping them discover music the same way she once had, with wonder, not with pressure. At her small school, she became more than a teacher. She became a guide, a listener, a friend. Some children had lost parents, some had seen violence. Some were simply shy and unsure of themselves. But Maria understood all those feelings. She never forced them to play perfectly. She just asked them to feel the music and be honest with it. One afternoon, A student named Luca, who had always been nervous, finally played a song in front of the class. It wasn't perfect. He missed a few notes. But when he finished, Maria clapped with joy. "You played with your heart," she said, "and that's what matters most." Word of her school spread slowly. Musicians visited from other countries. Some offered her money. Others offered big halls. But Maria only accepted donations if they would help buy instruments for children. She never chased anything for herself. As the years passed, her school grew. Some of her students went on to study music professionally. Others simply carried the joy of music in their lives forever, but they all remembered one thing Maria told them: music is not about being perfect, it's about being real. Eric too changed. He continued performing, but his style softened. His heart opened. He started composing again, something he hadn't done in years. And every time he wrote a new piece, he thought of Maria, her quiet strength, her painful story, her kindness. He often said in interviews, "Maria Keller reminded me what music truly is." One day, a large magazine asked Maria to do a big article. They offered her money, photos, a fancy shoot. She said no. Instead, she asked them to write about her students. "They are the future," she said. "I'm just the past coming back for a little while." Still, people continued to talk about. The night Maria returned to the stage, some remembered the way she played. Others remembered the way she looked, calm, graceful, humble. But most of all, they remembered the feeling they had in their hearts when she played that final note. That silence, that truth. Maria lived many more years. She never chased fame, never became rich. But she was remembered everywhere, in concerts, in schools, in stories, not because she was famous, but because she was real. And sometimes that's all the world needs: someone real, someone simple, someone brave enough to share the truth through music. What began as a joke, a famous pianist asking a quiet cleaner to play, had turned into something greater than anyone had imagined. It had changed to lives. It had inspired thousands. It had shown the world that even the most hidden light can shine again, if only given a chance. And the most beautiful part: Maria never planned for it. She just listened to her heart and let it sing.